So we have an idea in the West about knowledge. We have a pretty firm, often unexpressed idea of what knowledge is and consists of, an image of it. And for one thing, first of all, knowledge is hard. It's hard won. It's difficult to come by. I'm going to go forward in the slides because I am a master of technology. And I had the choice of two buttons, and I chose the wrong one. It's hard to come by because knowledge requires going underneath the surface of things. Things are not always the way they appear. So now knowledge is a challenge. It's difficult and it's hard. In the West, at least, to know has been the human project. It's been our fate, our destiny. It's the fulfillment of our essence. It's what we as humans do as humans. And to know it has been to know the essence of things, to know what the thing is, despite its appearance. And to know what a thing is has meant to know where it fits into the order of things. And everything, at least traditionally, has one place in this order, one spot that determines what its essence is. It is a member of this group, but it is unlike the other members of its group. And when you know that in the West, you know what the thing is, what its essence is. And this is a beautiful order. It's a perfect order. It's a divine order. Knowledge has been settled. Our idea of knowledge is that from which all disagreement has been driven. If we're still in doubt, if we're still arguing with one another seriously about something, we say, well, we don't yet know. Knowledge drives out difference, at least traditionally. And knowledge has been something that we can master. Knowledge is possible. We think, we have thought, knowledge is possible. It is possible to build a building of knowledge, a school, a library, and to choose wisely what is in and what is not in. It is something that can be mastered. Knowledge can be written down. It can be known. This is what knowledge has been because from the beginning we have faced a fundamental fact as humans on this earth, which is the world is way too big to know. It's too big to fit into any one skull. Our skulls don't scale. They don't get big enough to contain the world of knowledge. And so we've had to use a strategy of reducing what is to be known into pieces that can be known, into something small enough to fit into our pathetically tiny skulls, our pathetically tiny brains. And so one of the ways of doing this, one primary way of doing this, is to break off brain-sized chunks of the world. Right? To take the world, you break it into topics that are the size of a human brain and that can be known by a human brain. And we master these topics. And the people who do this are experts. And then we call upon our experts. When we have a question, we ask them a question. We get an answer. And we trust the answer, as we should. This is our strategy. We trust the answers of the experts because we know they have mastered these brain-sized chunks. And so our system of knowledge, to a large degree, has been a system of stopping points. We have experts who have credentials. Credentials are also a system of stopping points. Oh, I see that you are a doctor of whatever. You wrote the book, you are an expert, so I can believe what you say. And so we can stop asking. If we want to know what the atomic weight of carbon is, we can look it up in a textbook. We can ask a professor. And when we get our answer, it's good, we can stop. And so this is a very, very efficient system of knowledge. It's made us the dominant species on the planet because this system is so efficient. But it is primarily a system of stopping points that allow us to know and then get on with it, to go ahead, to rely upon what we've learned. Very, very efficient system. I'm not going to argue against it, at least not much. It has worked for us very, very well. But it is not how knowledge is. It's how books are. It's how the medium of knowledge is. It's how paper is. Paper has been the medium by which we preserve and communicate knowledge. It has certain strengths, and it has certain limitations. Our system of knowledge as a system of stopping points reflects the limitations of paper. Books, for all of their glory, are and I say this to a room full of people who care about books, who write books. I say this as somebody who also cares about books and write books. Nevertheless, they are a profoundly disconnected medium. They have footnotes pointing to other works, but the footnotes generally are there as stopping points also. They are generally to reassure you that there is something behind what you've just read in the book. It takes an enormous amount of effort to actually track down a footnote. You may well have to get on a bus and go to a major city and find a large library and go through the stacks and hope that the book is in. And so it's not a very efficient system. It's very expensive to do that, so we don't. Books are designed to be self-contained and disconnected, to contain within themselves everything you need to know as a reader about the topic, and all of the assurance that you need as a reader that the book is reliable, can be trusted, can be a stopping point for your inquiry. Knowledge is as it is in our culture because its medium is so disconnected. But now we have a new medium. And you can think about hyperlinks as being a new type of punctuation. Most punctuation tells us where to stop. Hyperlinks, as a new type of punctuation, tell us how to continue. In fact, they enable us to continue by making the smallest possible human motion. I just did it. I'll do it again if you missed it. And you've just traversed the library. Hyperlinks are a connective medium. And with the hyperlink, knowledge changes. We adopt a new strategy. The internet thinker, I think a great internet thinker, Clay Shirky, has said that there is no such thing as information overload. There's only filter failure. And so he traces information overload back to Gutenberg. The Harvard historian Anne Blair traces it back a bit further, and in fact, you can take it all the way back to Seneca and before. We have always felt there is too much to know. Our brains are just too small, our skulls are too confining. That has always been the case. Clay's point is that we feel this way when our filters, our way of managing, of reducing what there is to know, our reductive strategy has failed us. And it fails us repeatedly, and then we fix it. We come up with new ways of filtering. Nevertheless, and so there's a continuity between the ancients and the moderns in this. We have always felt overwhelmed, and we have always, nevertheless, managed by filtering and by reducing. But now there is a difference. The filters are different. The old filters, if you were, say, on the library committee and you have to decide which books come into the library, you make wise decisions. But the users of the library do not see the truckload after truck 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 of the books that were rejected. They do not see those trucks moving away from the library. They do not have the sense of the overwhelming amount of information that is not making it into the library. Instead, they open the library doors, the lights are on, they see the works carefully arranged, perfectly arranged, beautifully arranged. And they have the sense that this is the human world, that it is knowable, it is known, it is orderable, it is manageable. If they saw the trucks backing away, they might not have that same sense. Well, that's where we are on the internet. So when you filter on the internet, you are simply, let's say you have a blog and you are coming up with what you think are the 10 most important works about whatever your field is. And so you make a list and you discuss them and you have hyperlinks. All that you are doing in that sort of filtering is reducing the number of clicks that it takes for your readers to get to those works. They can get there in one click. But all those works are still available on the web and might show up in a search, at a search engine, or somebody else's post, or in an email that gets sent around, or on Facebook, or on Twitter, or in any of the other ways that we make recommendations to one another and bring works forward. We now don't filter out so that what we don't accept that goes away. We instead just filter things forward. We bring them to the front. but the background is still there, and we know it. We know it all the time. We have a sense of how big the internet is. We see this all the time because every page leads to every other page because it is a web. We know it because every time we do a search, such as on the phrase information overload, for example, the search engines show us how many things it's not showing us. There are over 3 million results. And by the way, we got those results in 1/5 of a second. How much can you do in a library in 1/5 of a second? So we are constantly presented with the overload of the internet. It is no longer hidden from us the way our previous strategy hid the abundance, the overabundance, the inhuman overabundance of knowledge that's available to us. So although skulls do not scale, they do not grow large enough, they don't grow indefinitely, networks do. Networks scale like nothing we have ever seen. Libraries don't scale, skulls don't scale, textbooks don't scale, networks scale. That is the fundamental fact that we are facing. And that changes the nature of knowledge. So I want to look just quickly at a few different changes that occur. And the first is about the change from exclusive to inclusive knowledge. So it used to be that to know what something was, okay, so a lab rat having hit this 3 times would stop. I will not. To know was to know how something fit into the order, the singular order. And we in our culture, in our civilizations, we've had many arguments about whether something is this or is that. Does it fit here? Does it fit there? We have these arguments because the physical world requires us to make decisions about where to put things. Everything has to go someplace. Everything can only go in one place at a time. 2 things cannot be in the same spot at the same time. Going backwards again. Wow. We should get a lab rat. You cannot get 2 things in the same place in the real world, no matter how hard you try. This holds in New Jersey as well as the rest of the world. And because of that, our sense of classification of the mental order, the intelligible order, reflects this limitation of the physical. Everything fits into the physical order one place and one place only as well. And so we've had to curate our ideas. If you're publishing a newspaper, somebody has to decide what goes on the front page, and we make intelligent, wise decisions usually about this. Nevertheless, those decisions always reflect some set of internally held values. They're always political decisions. The same is, of course, true of textbooks. Likewise, you can see part of the price that we've paid by looking, for example, with our old paper medium, by looking at the world's greatest English language encyclopedia, until recently, the Encyclopedia Britannica. There are only 65,000 articles in the printed version of the Britannica. And you can ask why, and the answer is obvious. It's primarily because of the combination of economics and physics. They can't afford to print much more than the number of volumes that they print. So 65,000 articles in Britannica. How many articles in the English version of Wikipedia at the moment? Anybody? 3.5 million in the English version, and then combined, there are multiple languages. There are obviously many more than that. So why are there only 65,000? Because of paper, limitations of paper and the economics that go with it. And so part of the price that we pay for this is not simply that much doesn't get covered in the Britannica or any encyclopedia, paper encyclopedia. What's worse is Britannica, which is something of an icon in the English-speaking world, because of its limitation, consistently acts against history. It reduces the value of, and it's very easy to show this. The original article about Oliver Goldsmith, the great English writer, which was written, by the way, by Thomas Macaulay, the great English historian, was 6,000 words long. In 1911, the 1911 edition, it was cut in half. New things happened. They had to include more. They only have 65,000 articles, but the world keeps growing. In the latest edition, it's a mere 1,500 words. There goes history. The editor of that final cut said, one's encyclopedia grows less useful because what one wants to know is crowded out by things one doesn't want to know. By AD 3000, no doubt Dear Oliver will be reduced to a couple of lines. And so this icon of tradition, the Encyclopedia Britannica, actually is profoundly anti-historical because it has to be, because paper is so limited. So we are switching rapidly to a new strategy on the net, which is one of inclusion. Include everything. It's cheaper to include everything than it is to go through and carefully delete things. That is generally the case, not always, but it's generally the case. It is cheaper and easier to include everything. So when in doubt, include it. Why? Well, for example, if you instead excluded that which had no value, you undoubtedly would keep out all of the articles about pop singers, about, say, Britney Spears and so forth. And if you did that, and we understand why, it would be a reasonable decision. If you did that, you would then have destroyed this academic conference and this area of study, which is the treatment of female celebrities by the media. All of that primary source material would be gone because you were making decisions about what you thought your readers would be interested in. And you would make good decisions because you're wise, thoughtful people, but you would necessarily be wrong in many instances because nobody can know what everybody else is interested in. For one thing, history happens. And so we could not know ahead of time, we would not have put into this curated collection articles about the town meetings in the little town of Wasilla, which it turns out is the home of Sarah Palin, who turned out to be of some, we hope, passing historical significance. I actually had a picture of Sarah Palin to illustrate this point, but I couldn't stand it. So I spared you. You're welcome. So include everything and allow your users, your readers, to filter on the way out rather than on the way in. But to do that, you need to give them very good tools so that they can make their decisions and find what they need based upon their interests and their ways of understanding the world. So here's a quick example. The Library of Congress in the United States is overwhelmed with material. It had 3,000 color photographs from World War II. These are quite remarkable photographs that it had never gotten around to curating fully. And so they posted those photographs on a popular public site, Flickr, and allowed the public to fill in information. So the Library of Congress posted what it knew about the pictures, which was some, but not a lot, and then allowed users to use Flickr's tagging system to tag anybody who wanted to, could tag these photos. So tags, as you know, are labels that are applied by end users. And in this case, there are 75 available slots that Flickr gives. They filled up instantly, by the way, in a matter of days for most of the photographs. And they include the sorts of tags that a professional cataloger would provide, World War II, etc. And then some that were just sort of crazy and made sense to one person, but that's how tags work. And some that were unusual. So, for example, the word coif is there. Coif is a 1940s term for a woman's hairdo. And her hair is actually quite beautiful and carefully arranged, and if you were interested in the history of hair stylings, the word coif would be meaningful to you. Somebody tagged it red because of the mirroring of the red of her lips and the red of the probe, which is an aesthetic judgment. I hadn't noticed how important red was to this. Somebody tagged it Rosie the Riveter, who in the United States in World War II was an icon of women in manufacturing. This is not Rosie the Riveter. Nevertheless, if you were interested in the history of women in manufacturing in World War II, you could click on that tag because tags are hyperlinks. And you would see all the photos that anyone at Flickr had tagged Rosie the Riveter. And this could be incredibly useful and interesting to you. So you take these tags and you arrange them. This is a very different way of thinking about how something fits into an order. The old way would say there's a single right way of cataloging this. Tags say, well, no, all the different ways that people think about this, how it matters to them. That's what the tags are. That's what the catalogs are. That's what the position of this photo is. Depending on what you're interested in, these are all some of the tags. That's the right label, the right catalog, the right category for these. And it seems to me that this is, in fact, this set of tags does a better job of helping us to understand what that thing is, whether it's a photo or an apple or a beetle or whatever. The set of tags gives us a better contextual sense of what the thing is than the single decision about the single category that in the paper-based world we would have had to put this photo into. Not a single essence, multiple essences based upon the wide set of human interests. But if we're putting everything together this way, then what happens to the order that has been so important and characteristic of knowledge itself? Because it is a cheap paradox that the age of connection is also an age in which things fall apart. It's because we're able to join things so loosely through hyperlinks that the tight connections between things are beginning to feel constrictive and artificial and unnecessary. So I want to give you a quick example of this. If you look up the topic philosophy in Britannica and in Wikipedia. In Britannica, there are 180,000 consecutive words about philosophy. Starts here, ends there. You've now read 3 books worth of words about philosophy. Wikipedia's article last time I looked was 9,000 words, which is very long for Wikipedia. So it looks as if 20 times more in Britannica than in Wikipedia. But of course I've left something out in this count. Any guesses? The links, absolutely, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of links just in those 9,000 words. This is a section. Every third word, every fourth word is linked. So now you want to do the comparison between Britannica and Wikipedia. How many words each about philosophy? So you're going to have to start clicking on links. Britannica, we know. Wikipedia, we're going to have to start clicking on links, which means we're going to have to start deciding which links count. And so some are obvious. We're trying to figure out which articles in Wikipedia to count in our philosophy total. Hellenistic philosophy, yes, we are going to count that. And Thomas Aquinas, sure he's a saint, but he counts as a Western philosopher. And reason, absolutely, we'll count that. And faith, well, not so sure. Because Western philosophy has argued for thousands of years about whether faith is the opposite of philosophy or it should be included within philosophy. So you will have to decide if that counts in your word count. Likewise for God, likewise for theology, metaphysics, and all the rest of it. And so the loose nature of those connections means that it's impossible for us to decide, here is the topic of philosophy. It seems to me that Wikipedia's hyperlinked sense of a topic is a far better reflection of the nature of topics than the contiguous 180,000 words in the paper-based Britannica. And what's true of Wikipedia is true of the internet overall. The topics are more naturally reflected. They have a more natural shape, more natural topology in the linked world of the web than in the contiguous paper world. Second question about order, the order of knowledge, is look at the hard case. The hard case is long-form argument. That is, a book like Origin of Species. It starts in one place and goes all the way to the end. In the form of the best form of a long-form argument, the pieces, each step is carefully tied to the one before it. A and B leads to C, and then we do D, and then we get to E and to F, and we get all the way to the end of our book. And we have brought the reader from A to Z, or whatever. That's a long-form argument, and it has been the pinnacle of human reason and human thought. We revere authors, some authors, because they bring us through the complex world step by step and bring us all the way to the end. So, in a hyperlinked world, what happens to that? One thing that happens is we keep doing it. I'm not going to say, long-form argument is dead. I'm not going to say, long-form argument is dead, everything is hyperlinked and messy. I do think, however, that long-form argument is not going away, but it is being dethroned as the primary and highest form of human reason. It's a prediction. I've never write about anything, so if you don't like it, you should be comfortable. Nevertheless, it seems to me that that form of argument is so tied to paper that it is unlikely to remain the highest form of human reason. So I want to point to three difficulties with long-form argument that we can notice once we start, once we're not as committed to paper as we were. So here's the table of contents of The Origin of Species, which I think is a masterpiece of long-form thought. It's a literary work as well as obviously an important scientific one. The middle 6 chapters, 6 through 11, are replies to objections. So there's Charles Darwin in 1859, writing at long last the work that he's been thinking about for decades. He's sitting alone, and he is thinking about what his worst objectors, his worst critics are going to say. How are they going to tear him down? Tear down his ideas, tear down his reputation as far as that goes. And so he imagines all of the worst things that people can say, and he responds to them. Perfectly reasonable thing to do in a paper-based world, because you have to anticipate your objections, because you cannot actually hear your objections. Because when you write on paper, you're writing in private. You're writing alone. And so you have to have the nightmare of all your critics running through your head, and you have to respond to them to make sure that they can't hurt you. This is how we do it on paper. It's the right thing to do on paper, but it's a weird, isolated form of thought. It's close to a legitimized paranoia. And it's, as I say, it's the right thing to do on paper, but it is far less than what you do if you're on the web and are publishing all along the way, not simply at the moment when you think you're done, when you are writing. A second problem with long-form thought is that it forces, you're trying to get your readers from A to Z. And so you will ignore anything that gets in the way of getting from A to Z. And some of those are objections, of course, but I'm actually thinking of all the digressions that you might take along the way that people might be interested in. We think of teaching as a course. In English, we call it a course. But it's really an exploration. And long-form writing is also a course that tries to keep you on track. That seems a shame when there's so much else to see in the world. But that's simply the way that you have to try to encapsulate it within a single book. So you have to be single-minded. Third problem with long-form writing, and you may well disagree with this, is it seems to me that there are actually very few examples of long-form writing that works, that gets you all the way from A to Z. Generally, we get off somewhere around D. Even in a great, so Origin of Species is an exception. You can get all the way to, I think, you get all the way to Z, and you say, yes, he was right. Critique of Pure Reason, one of the great long-form works in Western culture. Very few people get to the end continuing to say, yes, Kant absolutely nailed it. That's exactly right. I'm with them all the way. What we say, really interesting. A little weird, a little odd, but I finished the book. I'm very happy. But I got off around C, around D. They're actually long-form writing seems to me to be overrated. When it works, it's magnificent. Usually, it actually doesn't work. So I'm, first of all, not saying long-form thought has no value. I am not saying it is going away. What I'm suggesting is that we're going to see a rise in what is its opposite, which is not short-form thought, but is web-form thought. So imagine, for example, that Darwin lived now. He would be blogging his ideas as they came up. People would be reacting. He would be responding to actual critics and supporters. A web of people who agree, disagree, who elaborate, who defend, who explain him, who push him further, who push him wrong, would emerge. And there would be more value. There would certainly be tremendous value in what Darwin was saying, of course. This is a work of great genius. There would be more value in the web overall, the web of connections that help us to understand, make sense of, critique, and go further than the original. There is more value in the web. And all long-form work from now on that has any value will be on the web, even if it's only printed. Even if it's somebody who says, I will not put it, I will only do it on paper. Nevertheless, the discussion of that long-form work will be on the web, and that discussion plus the long-form work has more value than the long-form work itself does. The web is absorbing, is creating this value. And finally, I want to say something about textbooks, although I am the least of the experts here on it, and I look forward to the discussion over the next couple of days. In a single slide, I want to point to at least some of the value of textbooks, and I'm going to take this for granted and not belabor this, because we all know that textbooks have this sort of value. They provide a type of competency in the basics, at least in the basics of an area. They cover a topic. They create a shared body of knowledge, which is usually important to the community of knowledge. And they create a measurable competency, which we undoubtedly could have a great number of arguments about. But imagine that we did not have paper. Imagine that we started with the web, not with paper, and we wanted to design textbooks. What would we do? Something considerably different, I think. And from this web-based view, I think we would draw a set of lessons, very clear lessons. The first is that our students and we would without a doubt understand, of course, that ideas are connected. There's no such thing as an idea in isolation. And textbooks give us this idea as well. The topics are loose edge. They go in every direction. The constriction of a topic within a field, within a boundary, is an artificial, sometimes useful, but an artificial restriction. It is not at all natural. The world surpasses topics instantly and totally. We would learn that we disagree. If we started with the web, one of the very first things we would learn is we don't agree. The comfortable safety of textbooks is unreal. We as a world don't agree about anything. Nothing. We would see that where there is agreement, it's based upon shared values. It is in some sense thus political or cultural, if you prefer. It's values-based. And that's very important. It's in fact this agreement about topics and facts and mastery and competency that enables a culture to exist. We would see immediately, if we were brought up on the web rather than on paper, that reading is social. It is only slowly becoming social, which is surprising to me, but it is becoming social. We have taken it as a private act, me and my book. Increasingly, we're doing it reading on network devices, which means one way or another, reading is social. Likewise, learning is collaborative, which I think we all agree on, and that if we had started with the web, we would view learning not as sort of selfish private act in which you get educated, you become improved, a better person. I'm in favor of that. Nevertheless, it's very private and individual. Learning can be public. As students learn, they can be publishing what they learn. The class can be making a wiki so that the class has a sense of what they're doing in class. Their education is not simply about making themselves better, but is a way of contributing to the good of their culture and their society. Learning should be a public act. And I think one of the implications of this is that textbooks can be something that students build, something that they write together in public and leave traces behind of what they are learning and how they are learning it. It seems to me that these messy webs that we are constructing for ourselves, beyond our human capacity to comprehend them, to hold them together, that scale way beyond our individual brains, beyond our collective brains, beyond our skulls, that these messy, multiply organized webs are a better reflection of what it means to know, of the shape of human knowledge, of its extent, of our striving together towards knowledge. That these are the webs that will allow us to build the textbooks that better reflect knowledge as a perpetual exploration of a world that is just way, way too big for our skulls. Thank you.